Welcome to Sister, a special series from Brooklyn Peace Center's podcast, Teaching Peace. I'm your host, Zipporah, a student at Bard High School for Early College in Brooklyn. I care deeply about justice, human rights, and creating space for young people, especially young women like myself, to lead and make real change. In each episode, I talk with women from communities impacted by war, displacement, and genocide. We center their stories, their resilience, their leadership, and their work to heal and transform the world around them. Thanks for listening. Let's begin with some context. The Uyghur Muslims are a Turkic people whose homeland lies in a region of western China called Xinjiang. In recent years, they face severe persecution at the hands of the Chinese government. More than 1 million Uyghurs have been detained in what the government calls re-education camps. Survivors of these camps say they were forced to abandon their faith, punished for refusing to obey, and made to work without pay. Families have been torn apart. Some children have been taken from their parents. And even for those outside the camps, surveillance is constant. Uyghurs are not allowed to practice their religion freely. They can't speak their language in schools. They're discouraged or even banned from celebrating their cultural traditions. There are also credible reports that Uyghur women are being forced to take medication or undergo surgeries to prevent them from having children, and have been sexually abused. The Chinese government says these measures are about preventing terrorism and maintaining order, but many nations and human rights groups say otherwise. They call it what it is: cultural erasure and genocide. Today's guest with us here is Kawsar Yasin, my friend. Kawsar is a Uyghur woman and an undergraduate student at Harvard University. She has witnessed struggles facing Uyghur communities in China, and she's courageously using her voice to advocate for justice, dignity, and human rights. As a student, storyteller, and activist, Kawsar is helping to shine a light on the realities of cultural oppression and state surveillance, while also uplifting the strength and resilience of her people. We're grateful she's here with us today to share her story and her insights. Kawsar, welcome to the show. We're honored to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for supporting and platforming not just me, but many other stories here.
Yes. Before we dive into your story, let's start with a few quick-fire questions. So, what is your go-to hype song when you need a confidence boost?
Oh, wait, that's a little bit, that's a question. I was not expecting that. I honestly, lately I've just been listening to anything by Saint Laurent.
If you could have coffee with any inspiring woman, past or present, who would it be?
I think I would definitely have coffee with, she's this Uyghur woman. Her name is Rizwangu. She served in the 1940s, rebellion period in East Turkestan, or I guess Xinjiang. And yeah, she was a nurse, but also really actively fought in battles and things like that. Super cool woman.
Wow, that's so deep. If I could have coffee with anyone, I would have coffee with Wu Zetian. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She was the first and only female empress of China. And I think it's really interesting how she rose to power, because there's not many women in power during that time period. And I think that's so powerful that she's been the only female leader in China ever in thousands of years.
Oh, interesting.
If you could wake up tomorrow fluent in any language, which would you choose?
Arabic. I just think it's a beautiful language. Also, just so many, you can talk to so much of the world.
And lastly, what is one form of media that you have been enjoying lately? It could be a book, an album, a podcast, or a show.
Oh, a form of media. Well, right now I'm looking into reading the book written by the Dalai Lama recently. So that's something that I've been starting, and it's been really interesting.
I love hearing about the little things that bring people joy, like we just shared. But now let's go a little bit deeper into your story as a Uyghur woman. So, as you've told me before, the pronunciation Uyghur isn't exactly how you'd pronounce it, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It should be pronounced as Uyghur.
Uyghur. Uyghur.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
Yeah, Uyghur, that's correct. So
Uyghur.
the GH actually is like a coming from your throat. It's a la.
That has like Arabic origins, right?
Yeah, that's correct. But
Yeah.
just because a lot of names and pronunciation and even the alphabet comes from the Arabic alphabet actually since Islam came.
So, what was it like growing up Uyghur, and how has your identity shaped the way you see the world?
Well, growing up Uyghur, I it's definitely something that my parents have told me and raised me with as like it's a very big part of who you are. But in reality, since we're the only Uyghur family in my like small town in Texas, I would say that I never really understood its importance or what it actually means. Not until really 2016. Even throughout my childhood, though, there have been little moments where I definitely have felt or heard about the problems that the rest of our extended family are facing back in Chinese occupied East Turkestan or I guess known as Xinjiang officially. I always just assumed that it was just a natural part of living under China, like being second class citizens. A lot of my family members, for example, regularly have had police checks or regularly faced like internet blackouts. Well, the most notable time I think was whenever I was just in kindergarten, and I remember just always constantly hearing my mom and dad like being so stressed about a recent protest that turned very violent in 2009. It's known as the Urumqi massacre. And that occurred because a Uyghur man was falsely accused of raping a Chinese woman, and because these allegations were pretty severe, this Uyghur man actually got killed. And as a result, lots of Uyghurs in the streets of the capital city of Urumqi were protesting just for his dignity, demanding justice for this wrongful killing. And because so many people were gathering, China issued, or the Chinese government basically brought out the military and the police to stifle these protests. And they arrested hundreds of thousands of people. And there was a massive internet blackout. And there was a huge clash on the streets, actually, as well. So this was just a very violent time. And I think it's also important to contextualize that a lot of people say 2017, 2016 changed their lives, but I think that the genocide and this like oppression started centuries and decades before. So this is also important to acknowledge. But that was so interesting because I was so far removed from this. I lived in America. I've lived in America my whole life. I've never been back. So hearing about what my family was going through, or even just hearing the anxiety that my own parents were feeling about their own brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, I definitely was a little bit like, okay, let me just stay out of this. I think that I'm just a kid. Like, there's something severe going on, but this is just like a part of everyday life for them living under China. And then I think growing up with that was pretty damaging because that kind of encouraged like apathy, like I can't do anything, like China's too powerful, like whatever. And up until 2017, things got really terrible just because like I've had family members that were detained and my parents lost actually complete contact and there was like huge radio silence after that. So that kind of made me, I think, recognize that okay, all of this, like all the arbitrary detentions, all the crackdowns, all the internet blackouts, and even just the general treatment as second class citizens is not normal and should not be normalized. And I can't believe we let it get this bad to the point of like flat out genocide.
Yeah.
And I think that's what made me like really step into this role of, okay, I'm Uyghur and I need to own it now. So prior to that, I just never really told people, but I became a lot more conscious of who I was, what I was doing, and like me just even being an Uyghur person existing and operating within different spaces is also super important. So normalizing the identity is super important just because no one knew who the Uyghurs were my entire life. So that's why I never really actually identified as a Uyghur. There were multiple times that I would say I was Chinese or even Turkish. So there were definitely that was just a big identity moment for me. And then once I got to college, I think that first of all, just being able to come to an institution like Harvard is already such a big privilege and something that a lot of people don't get to do. And I'm actually the only undergrad here that's Uyghur. So
For that,
that's definitely, yeah, so that's definitely played a big role in, okay, I was given this opportunity to do what now? Like, I know necessarily that's not my complete burden to represent my people, but at the same time, it is my burden just because I need to, wherever I go, I always need to be bringing my community with me. That's just the core value of being a part of a community that needs to be uplifted. So that's like where I really truly stepped into my role now as, I don't know, I'm just a student, but I'm also Uyghur, and that definitely defines like what I should be doing with my time and what I shouldn't be doing with my time. So once I got to Harvard, I've been hosting lots of protests. I've been able to go to the UN, tons of different advocacy like means. I was invited to testify at US Congress, like multiple things like that, just because of like, again, my position as a Harvard student, unfortunately, has finally had caused some people to take this problem seriously, right? Like, now that we've been able to penetrate these institutions, now, like, our peers and those around us and those in power can be take this seriously. So that's something that I've been trying to work on as well, is just generally normalizing it. I write about it all the time. I speak about it all the time whenever I can. And yeah, that's just what it means to me. Also, just organizing with other Uyghur youth and things like that. Even just providing spaces for Uyghur joy is also so important. Last week, I was able to organize a Nowruz, which is basically supposed to celebrate the Persian New Year. It's celebrated all across Central Asia and the Middle East. But for Uyghurs in particular, it's pretty cracked down on. And they also celebrate it as well. So last week, I know it happened in March, but we just decided to book a space here. And I worked with so many other folks here that are like Kurdish, Azeri, Iranian, or whatever. And we hosted this big celebration, and a huge amount of the local Boston community came over as well. So that was like really beautiful to see, just everyone being in community and joy together.
Yeah, it's so important in so many of these movements. I know especially in like the Black liberation movement and all that stuff, like Black joy is so important. And Uyghur joy is so important in moments like these. For those who might be new to this issue, could you tell me, since I know you're so educated in Uyghur history going back centuries and millennia, could you tell me a little bit about like where the conflict originally started? Because it's a very deep history.
I would like to draw the start of this conflict with empire. That's how conflict always starts, and that's how colonization always starts. And I think it's important to acknowledge that China existed as an empire prior to the modern Chinese government. China existed through like dynasties, right? There was like a huge emperor, there was a huge system. And when one family ruled for a long time, another family would take over and rule, and that would be a dynasty. So it was during the Qing dynasty when I think the problem really got huge. And although the Qing emperor and the Qing court, they're all not necessarily Han Chinese, they're actually Manchu. The problem of empire started with them. So their goal was actually to obviously expand like their empire across like the basically Asia as much as they could. And once they recognized that it also included being able to conquer East Turkestan and Tibet and other nations like that are in the western frontiers, because these regions are actually gateways to the rest of the world, right? Europe, or like being able to secure trade or whatever. So there was a huge like imperial, economic, colonial like intent behind having control of Uyghur lands. So in 1759, the Qing Empire actually began to conquer East Turkestan, or the Uyghur region, and that resulted in a lot of pushback, right? There was lots of rebellions, there was lots of skirmishes, like of Uyghurs actually defending their land. And it wasn't really until about the late 1800s when it was officially now a part of the Qing Empire, and that's when the name Xinjiang was given. So like these battles and the intent of conquering this region began in 1759, but then it wasn't officially called Xinjiang until later in the 1800s. And Xinjiang really means, and that's kind of like the final colonial act. That's the final act of conquest, which is, okay, now you have this entire land. Now let me brand it as something that is mine. So the name Xinjiang actually means new frontier, or translates to new frontier. And that name is not what we existed with prior to that. We called it East Turkestan. We called it so many other names. To be able to erase like local agency, or even how we call this land on our own, is an act of colonization as well. And then a lot of these skirmishes occurred because, okay, once you have a land, now you need to really integrate it into your society. But the problem is that when the people you've conquered are very different from you, that problem gets trickier. So the Qing government and also the Qing Empire oftentimes would place like marriage laws. Like Uyghur men now have to marry Chinese women or Qing women. And so they would oftentimes like bring in a bunch of different people. So this movement of people is what you call settler colonialism, right? So whenever you move your own native population into a land that you just conquered, so that you dilute the population, so that you make the populations intermingle, so that
Treat them
you,
out.
yeah, you basically not necessarily kick them out, but so kick them out. And then also just through like intermarriage, the actual Uyghur identity becomes lower and lower, right?
Yeah,
But
like
the problem is that a lot of the local Uyghurs they resisted to this because in reality, if I'm Muslim and I'm Uyghur and I'm Turk and I look nothing like you, why would I want to take some Chinese guy as my husband who can't even speak the same language? We don't practice the same religion. None of that made sense. And so there was a lot of rebellions actually and a lot of problems that were occurring since the 1800s actually. And then and then just generally you start to see like the development of land now. So beyond just like marriage laws and social order, they also tried to take advantage of natural resources. So once you have this land, you really bring in all these workers, you try to cultivate the land, you try and extract resources for your own like empire, right? So that's how it all began. It has colonial origins, settler origins. And today in 1911 is whenever the Qing Empire originally fell. It collapsed. So all like the concept of an emperor, dynasties, all of that completely disappeared after that because the Chinese people wanted to change. Then that's the birth of the Chinese Communist Party. And you have like now all of these warring factions. And finally in 1949, that's when the communists won and the People's Republic of China actually got established. So the modern Chinese government was originated in 1949. Like, I'm pretty sure some of our grandparents are actually older than that. So it's a very new, like, nation state. And this concept of, okay, everyone's Chinese, we need to reinstate order. And this new Chinese Communist Party is like Han Chinese, right? So the goals of this party and the reasoning for this party for why East Turkestan, why Tibet, all these regions are part of China is because the Qing Empire actually controlled all these lands. So in reality, when you like dispose of it, like a previous government and reinstate your own government, they're claiming all the borders that the old government had now. So in reality, the Chinese government has never really rolled East Turkestan. They just got it because they picked it up from whatever shambles the previous empire system had.
Yeah.
So that's how East Turkestan just ended up now in the hands of a new government. And now this government was really tighter on trying to reintegrate this land back into China and to really impose this idea that everyone must be Chinese. We need to make a unified nation state just so that there's no chaos, like, or anything. You see this with a lot of countries, like even right now in America, how whether that be Trump or other presidents as well, tried to perhaps erase other identities, whether that be indigenous identities or Black Americans or all this Black history, Hispanic Americans, all of that from museums, from textbooks or whatever, because there is like a need for a country to try and unify, to make sure that everything is homogeneous, right? So you run into all of these problems with the erasure of history, the erasure of people, just to fulfill like the nation's agenda. So that's how all of this kind of played out. So 1949 is whenever there truly was this new government and they did not want to extend any grace to like these newly conquered peoples. They really tried to impose, okay, we're not going to try and be like the old government where we kept failing. We're going to actually try and do something about integrating these people. So that's where you hear like all of these problems with the concentration camps even today. So that's all like the agenda of the Chinese government right now. And that's how that happened.
What do you think is most misunderstood or often overlooked about the Uyghur crisis in China?
And something that's overlooked, I will say that I'm just saying this from the perspective of a student, really, but I think what's really overlooked is just the intentional erasure of history. I think that's what's the problem here, is that like on top of just harming the people, you're going even beyond that, trying to make people unaware of their history, lose their language, lose their history. And that's whenever the situation just goes deeper than concentration camps. For example, like since 2017, there's been this program, I believe it's called the One Family, something like that. There's a name for it. But basically how the regime operates now is that since 2017, a lot of the men got incarcerated or put into concentration camps. So that often leaves like his wife and his kids at home. And what would happen is that the state would then come in and say that you are no longer fit to raise your children because they don't have a father. So the state comes in and takes these children to boarding schools where they can only speak Chinese and they can't speak Uyghur anymore, and that they don't get to see their mother anymore. And then oftentimes the mother who's left at home now, a Han Chinese man or a soldier ends up stationed at her house to surveil her and is now like forcibly having to marry her. And that's just this the destruction of the family structure
Yeah.
is really harmful as well. And not many people realize that it's a lot more insidious than just concentration camps, which already are pure evil. But beyond that, you just also see this erasure of history. What's something that's really heartbreaking is that in 2017, and not 2017, maybe like in the last 10, 15 years. So prior to the official start of the genocide and the discovery of the camps, there is this complete remodeling of the physical landscape, the historical landscape. So what's harmful is that, for example, mosques, shrines, and even statues of some notable Uyghur historians and writers ended up getting demolished completely. So these statues and shrines that have existed for centuries, and even just a statue commemorating someone like Mahmud Kashgari, who like really established the Uyghur language and recorded all the Turkic languages and dialects. He's a huge linguist, a huge like author, huge scholar. His statue in Kashgar got demolished by the Chinese state. And you see this complete demolition of culture, of history. That's so disheartening. But what's even more shocking is that the scholars now that have studied these sites, so for example, there's like all across East Turkestan, there's like a whole network of like shrines, of mosques, and like normally there's like pilgrimage routes that Uyghurs have been undertaking for centuries. If you go to this mosque and circle around this thing multiple times, like it's almost the same as going to Mecca or Saudi Arabia for pilgrimage. There's little things like that have been like so culturally rooted to Uyghur pilgrimage practices within the landscape, just because at the same time, even if it may not be like correct Islamically to be like, oh, this is the same reward as going to the Kaaba, the reality that many of these like myths and folklore have been created because the Chinese government criminalizes going to Saudi Arabia, right? So it hinders the movement of people. So people haven't been able to freely move to the Middle East, haven't been freely able to go to Saudi Arabia to fulfill like pilgrimage, which is the fifth pillar of Islam. And so a lot of Uyghurs have relied on like their knowledge of the land and their network of mosques and shrines to complete like these religious practices, these religious ceremonies. And then the scholars that study these, for example, Rahila Dawood, she is a scholar who studied and mapped all of these shrines, all of these mosques, and really recorded all these practices that Uyghurs would do. And in 2017, she disappeared, randomly, and her daughter lives in the United States. And she was so confused why her mom was being targeted because her mom was not a political person at all. She literally was just a writer. Like, she just would go and interview people and talk to people and write about it. And she published books and things like that. She never once called out the Chinese government. She was even a member of the Communist Party. And this Uyghur woman literally got detained and is facing a life sentence now. It was recently revealed because of her work in documenting mosques and writing about mosques and shrines and all these pilgrimage routes and practices that people would do. And this is a lot more insidious now. It's not just, oh, these people are separatists, oh, these people are terrorists, when the people you are detaining are just intellectuals. The people you're detaining are those that are recording history. That's like when it becomes a problem. This is a lot more than just criminalizing people who could be terrorists or, oh, these people have problems or whatever. It goes far deeper than that. It definitely is to erase an entire people, to erase the consciousness of this people, the collective memory of these people. So yeah, this is what's very dangerous, I think, about. And a lot of people don't recognize that it goes so much more deeper than just camps.
Faith is such a deep part of Uyghur identity, and yet religious practices have been banned or restricted. What role has faith, either personal or cultural, played in the resilience of your community and yourself?
Yeah, I think that faith has been a very tough thing for Uyghurs, I think, in recent years, so the past few decades, just because when you really think about it, faith and Islam have been criminalized in East Turkestan for so long, many people are actually forgetting how to practice Islam properly. So there's either they're practicing it in their own way, or maybe they're like just culturally Muslim, so they may not like fully be fasting all the time, or they may not pray all the time, but like they still believe in God. So you don't really run into a huge devout Muslim community in reality because of the criminalization of Islam. A lot of people actually forgot how to pray, or maybe forgot some verses of the Quran from memorization. Because in order to really retain these things, you have to do it in secret. You have to do it underground. Like a lot of people there's like these secret underground networks of like Islamic scholars and teachers that teach like their pupils about like the Quran, or like they memorize the Quran together. These things are so risky to be doing. So no one tries to go out of their way and learn more about Islam. And I think that whenever the concentration camps and the genocide really started, that's when I noticed that a lot more Uyghurs actually turned to Islam for comfort. So prior to the genocide and prior to everything, many people were like, oh, I'm Muslim, but they don't really practice as heavily or as devoutly. Now in the diaspora, after the genocide started, I'm noticing that a lot of more women, for example, wear hijabs in the Muslim community. They turn to God because they recognize that they can find peace like through religion. And I think it's a very powerful form of resistance to be recognizing that I am being punished and my religion is being punished and criminalized. It's like a final like spit in the face against your oppressor whenever you become even more religious. You don't want me to practice my religion, but guess what? I'll practice it even more now. That's actually a very powerful thing that a lot of people have been turning to. There's this one notable woman who actually was jailed into a concentration camp whenever the camp network started to expand a lot more. And I remember hearing about her story because she would tell about how she was in a cell with 30 other women. There was no space to sleep or lay down. People had to take turns because there was no space. And any like religious phrase that was being said or whatever, these women would get harmed or, I don't know, hit or beat simply for saying like certain phrases like Allah or whatever. One of the days, her family worked really hard actually to smuggle her out. So it was through bribing guards or like fabricating some documents. They managed to smuggle her out of the concentration camp. But before she left, other women in the camp begged her to pray for them because none of them could make dua, none of them could pray, none of them could do anything in the cell. You can't even say anything religious. So all these women are now in like this box where they're banned from even saying any religious phrase. And this woman now is able to go out into the outside world. And all these women now are rushing to her saying, can you please make dua for me? Can you please pray for me? And now this woman exits these camps with a new purpose. So she moves to Turkey and she becomes a refugee. And this woman finally started to wear the hijab for the first time. This woman is so much more religious now. And I think she definitely is dead devoted to praying every single prayer. She probably doesn't miss a single prayer. And in each one, she probably prays for all the women that she shared that cell with. Because at the end of the day, she's praying for them because they can't do it. So I think that's the obligation and responsibility a lot of us have outside of East Turkestan, is to be praying for our brothers and sisters that are unable to do so, we're supposed to be fighting for our brothers and sisters who can't even say the word Uyghur because that is even criminalized. So things like that, I think, are so important to recognize. And I would say that faith has brought all of us comfort.
In my personal faith is someone who is religiously Mennonite, which is a denomination of Christianity, and ethnically Hutterite. They're very similar. We do not believe in war. We are very much so against war. So peace is so important through religion.
Peace is so important too. Islam is a religion of peace, but Islam is also a religion of justice. So
Yeah.
I think that sure, peace can only go so far, but at the end of the day too, it also calls for you, the oppressed, or for anyone who's oppressed, to rise against their oppressor and fight for justice as well. And I think that's at the end of the day what we all need to strive for too, is like a lot of Muslims in the diaspora are also realizing this, or a lot of Uyghurs are realizing this, where like true justice comes about by holding your oppressor accountable, and that's when you have to fight back. So anything that you can do, whether that be through like writing, through poetry, or even raising awareness through protesting, And in fact, Islam calls you to do that, even if some of these things could be a little bit more violent. Maybe you have to shout, maybe you have to engage with the other side or whatever. It's this ongoing struggle for justice. And that's, I think, also a super important thing to recognize too. Is sure, you have to be peaceful, but at the same time, you can't just sit here and let your oppressor like continue to win either. So
Yeah.
it's really calling on people to come up and really like defend their people, to defend their honor, to defend their religion, and all these kinds of different aspects of your identity. If they're under attack, it's on you as well to do something about it. That's also what Islam calls on you to do.
As a young Uyghur woman at Harvard, how do you see your role in amplifying the voices of women who are being silenced? And are there Uyghur women, leaders, artists, or elders who've inspired your path or helped shape your voice?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, being an Uyghur woman at Harvard, who's also Muslim as well, I think that I'm trying to always find solidarity with other people here. Because when I first came to Harvard and I was the only one, I was a little jealous of like the Brazilian Students Association or even like the Black Student Association. Just to have a very vibrant community here is something that I don't have. So I definitely am trying to find ways in which I can find solidarity or even just connect across difference with other folks. So here I'm actually pretty like involved in the Muslim Students Association or the Islamic Society. And even in the beginning when I tried to be super involved in like Asian American organizing and things like that, I've been able to try and at least draw affinity with other people who may not directly relate to me or they may not be Uyghur, but I've actually gotten so close to them because we have this shared struggle. So like, for example, there's like 4 Tibetan undergraduates here, and I'm super close with them. The Tibetan Cultural Association is like my second home now, even though I'm not Tibetan myself at all. And it's just because of this like understanding in the other struggle for liberation, for freedom. We literally have the same oppressor. So that also helps too. I think that that's also like some of my best friends here are Tibetan or Himalayan or other things like that that are facing some dispute or struggle by China or against China. I think I've been able to, yeah, the CCP. So I've been able to start like a coalition of students resisting the CCP here, actually, like
Yeah.
Taiwanese, Tibetan, Hong Konger, like all of these folks that are actually being marginalized by the Chinese government. So that's also just been very fulfilling as well. And also just generally like what inspires me so much, I think, are seeing other Uyghur women take on roles across the diaspora. In reality, a lot of people argue that, I don't know, we live in a patriarchy and everything, but in the Uyghur context, I've noticed that the people leading our movement are actually women. A lot of the women that, for example, the president of the Uyghur American Association is a woman. A lot of the people that are transmitting the language to younger generations in Sunday schools in the diaspora are women. And I think that they are at the forefront of our movement and of our cause. So that's something that really inspires me as well, is just seeing other really strong women persist despite all of these struggles, I think have been like so core to me feeling empowered to do the same thing. So that's like why I do the things I do. I even study anthropology because of Rahila Dawood, the woman who got a life sentence for studying Uyghur shrines and things like that. A lot of these things that like the reason why I study history and anthropology is actually because of Uyghur women that are trailblazers in their fields. And my Uyghur professor here, I'm the only undergrad here, but I'm so lucky that the language is offered here at Harvard. So I've been able to read and write my mother tongue, and my teacher is a woman, and she's the one who's been, I think, like really propelling me and urging me and pushing me to do whatever I can. And it's been so wonderful to at least have like a motherly, nurturing presence here. And she's who inspires me so much too. So I really do like that's what keeps me going here at Harvard. And I always try to be loud and proudly Uyghur. So
Yeah.
that's why I think that I've been able to connect across difference and really try and make something out of this. I've started a club here. A history class is going to be taught here next semester. So it's been really cool.
That's so powerful and so important. For those who are listening who care but don't know where to begin, what are 3 meaningful ways they can support Uyghur communities?
I think, first of all, just being educated and informed about what's happening, I think is the first thing. So, like supporting Instagram accounts or staying in touch with the news on this matter, the Uyghur Human Rights Project, the Uyghur American Association. I run United Uyghur Youth, so you guys should check that out. We make reels and little fun content. The Uyghur Youth Initiative does a lot of work too, and they're based in Europe. So, following Instagram accounts and really amplifying Uyghur voices is a big one. Secondly, I think is to donate. There's so many Uyghurs in the diaspora that are struggling with like just basic needs. And I know a lot of people really want to donate to the Uyghurs on the ground, but in reality, you can't reach them. Like, you really can't, just because the Chinese government is oppressive, authoritarian, anything of that nature. So we can't really get aid over to the Uyghurs in East Turkestan. But what you can do is actually support the Uyghurs that live outside, because these are the ones who have escaped. These are the ones that are struggling in their new homes and their new lives. So there's actually like a really large Uyghur orphanage in Istanbul. There's a lot of Uyghurs in Turkey that are trying to escape to the West or the UK or whatever to try and get a better education. So I think in whatever shape or form you can, just to donate to Uyghurs who are trying to uplift themselves. A good way in which you can find fundraisers like this, I think, are through the Tarim network. And then just in general, like supporting Uyghur like advocacy efforts or just grassroots mutual aid funds, I think are so important. And I think the third way is just to take action. So host events at your local university or to go to protests or anything like that are also super important. If you can't find a protest, then do your own and start your own. I think that's like a huge thing is action and really disruption are such a big part of starting dialogue and making people aware that this is a problem. So yeah, those are I guess as the three things that you should be doing is to engage with content, to donate, and to take action, like physically. So start a protest, see if you can organize one, but just anything you can to get people to recognize that people are angry, or some people are angry.
That's really important. Call to action. What are hopes for yourself, for Uyghur women, and for the global movement for justice?
My hopes for myself and other Uyghur women and just like globally, like all Uyghurs all over the world is just for them to be able to exist and feel empowered and have dignity. And I think just to be represented and to really see themselves in history books, in to not be like washed over by whatever Chinese history exists. I think that's like it's a very basic ask, but that's like really my goal and my hope is that you see Uyghurs in academia, you see Uyghurs in leadership positions, you see Uyghurs really taking the charge, and also just to be like their history and their culture is preserved in academic institutions. Like all having like books and everything exist outside of East Turkestan and outside of China are super important and critical in general. That's honestly my goal is to have Uyghur studies as a field, to have an Uyghur studies center. Like you have a Middle Eastern studies center or an African American studies center, just to have a place of scholarship where people can talk about who the Uyghurs are, what they're up to, what their future looks like, all of these things that are so core to who we are. To be able to produce scholarship and writing and all of that is so important in combating genocide. And that's something that I really hope younger Uyghurs can also get to live one day where they can see themselves represented in books and academic works and really see themselves in media and everything too. And that all really starts with normalizing these things in powerful places. So in institutions like Harvard, like in institutions across the US, that's also super important.
Sister Sister is about ending genocide through supporting women across borders. So, what does sisterhood mean to you, and how has it shaped your journey?
Sisterhood, what that means to me is just being in solidarity with other women and that other women support each other. I think it's so funny that I always make this joke that it's always Uyghur women that are like running the movement and like doing so much. And that's really how I feel with even just collaborating with other women within the space, just to host an event or anything of that nature. Even within the Tibetan Cultural Association here, they're all girls. So just I don't know, I think it's so moving and empowering that we're in these spaces where it's just women, that we can exist like boundlessly, like limitlessly with each other. And I think that's just so important just because being a woman is already so difficult, compounded by existing patriarchal norms and even just like the unique crimes against humanity that women face by the Chinese government is super core to what being an Uyghur woman looks like, what being a Tibetan woman looks like, and all of that. So I think just being in sisterhood means that we understand each other's like pains, each other's sacrifices, and really just moving forward with that hand in hand. So what kind of sisterhood looks to me is just to be able to, I don't know, just talk openly and candidly with other women, to feel safe with other women, and all of our own emotional experiences, our lived experiences are shaping our movement building, our grassroots organizing. And I think that that's so beautiful to me, is just to be able to work with other women really for a better world.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
Yes. How can people follow your work or support what you're doing, Kawsar?
Yeah, so I think that first of all, you should just follow like whatever Instagram accounts you can. The Uyghur United Uyghur Youth is like a big thing that I'm working on. Rowan mentorship is something that I'm trying to work on as well, where I hopefully want to start an Uyghur scholarship fund, maybe get more Uyghurs to get higher education. And I'm mentoring Uyghur high school students to be able to get into colleges of their choosing. And so far, we've gotten 3 students into Princeton and like 3 into UPenn, which is great. So I think that just normalizing like Uyghurs in higher education and things like that are super important. And that's a mentorship program that I'm doing right now. It's Rowan Uyghur Mentorship on Instagram. And then, yeah, I think just like doing all of that kind of work is so valuable and critical. The Coalition of Students Resisting the CCP is huge as well. It's an initiative that I started with a Taiwanese and a Tibetan friend. And it like really kicked off.
Before we close, I'd love to talk a little bit about care, about how we sustain ourselves and one another. So, what's one small daily practice that brings you joy?
Ooh, a small daily practice that brings me joy is just, I don't know, calling my sisters, calling my friends, just
Yeah.
like really just talking candidly with and openly with some of my closest friends. And even just, I love to see my sister succeed. So I just love to talk to her. Yeah, it's like the most beautiful thing. If anything, I want them to be more successful than me.
But Kawsar, thank you so much for sharing your story and your truth. Your voice is so powerful, and I'm so grateful that we could have this conversation and we could talk about the Uyghurs, because I feel like it's so radical to even talk about it, because sometimes I talk to like random people and they don't know. And that's scary, because when people start learning about stuff, when people start educating themselves on it, that's when real change happens. So thank you so much for being on this episode of Sister Sisters. This has been so powerful.
Thank you so much, Zipporah, for having me. And it's so admirable that you have these conversations.
Thanks for listening to Sister Sister, a special series of the Teaching Peace podcast. These conversations remind us that peace is a practice and a shared responsibility. And if today's episode moves you, take a moment to reflect, share it with someone, and take action in whatever way you can. And if you made it to the end, thank you. Don't forget to like, smash that subscribe button, and share the podcast with your people. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep building peace.